Hi, folks. This is Robert Nelson with Pivotal New Mexico. I'm their program manager. Welcome to the latest in our series on New Mexico Recovers, hashtag NM Recovers, which is brought to you by not only us, but also the Grant Plant and the Kellogg Foundation. Today, we're going to be talking about the age-old question in grant writing: should I apply for this grant? And a little bit about Pivotal New Mexico. We started in 2016. But have been around since 2015 or so, like in the planning phase, so to speak. But if you don't know anything about Pivotal, you can check us out at pivotalnm.org. We are a capacity building nonprofit organization, which means that we work to resource and find funding and build capacity for people to find resources and find funding in New Mexico, especially community organizations, nonprofit organizations, government entities, all that good stuff. And we do that primarily through a couple programs. One is our Talent Academy, which is a deep dive into grant training itself, grant seeking, grant training, evaluation, project development, all that good stuff. And our cooperative network, which actually brings this fun little program to you today. It's our online in-person network and grant seeking tool, which allows people to share resources, connect in the community on funding and funding opportunities alike, and also even just connect with what's going on right now with what's going on with recovery, especially. And so I'm going to ask folks to do this for me today is if you could introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your organization, your pronouns. Pronouns are important these days. And what you're hoping to get out of this conversation, this workshop today, especially. So once again, introduce yourself in the chat. You can find the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom application, either there or in the three dots. If you see the three dots that say more, you can press the chat button and you'll bring up like this little chat box on the right-hand corner. So your name, your organization, your pronouns, and what are you hoping to get from the workshop, especially. And I pass it to my good friend, Tanya Brown. And I'm very, very happy to introduce her and be her co-pilot today. So Tanya, pass to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to mute myself.
All right. Thank you very much for that introduction. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I've missed you. It seems like it's been forever since I've seen you all. And today we're going to be going over, as Robert mentioned, kind of the hot topic is like, really, should we apply for this grant? Is it worth our time? Is it worth our investment? And so we're going to go over some sort of internal tips and tricks that we have sort of gleaned over the years as we've decided and had these conversations over the period of many, many years. So we will be sharing that insight that we have. So let's start. There we go. Hopefully everybody can see that. This is the Pivotal team Robert was just describing. Aren't they handsome? And I want to comment that this workshop was made possible with the generous support of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. They are the ones that help to fund this whole series of trainings, as well as other additional resources that are available, blog posts, grant announcements, and other resources that are available on the Pivotal New Mexico website. I am Tanya Brown. I'm a resource development officer with the Grant Plant. The Grant Plant, as you can see right here, was 13, now 14. We just hired somebody else, 14 people strong. We were founded in 2003, and we are a grants writing and resource development consultation firm that performs services nationally, but we're based in New Mexico and primarily have New Mexican clients. This is a quick little fact sheet about the Grant Plant. In 2020, we were able to bring in almost $25 million of funding requests. And overall, since 2003, I believe that number is just about, or just over $180 million. We do a substantial number of federal grants, but we also do all kinds of local, private, family foundation, community foundations, United Ways, all sorts of grants across the boards. And so we have a great deal of experience with talking to our clients about whether or not they should apply for grants and whether it's in their best interest to invest that time and resource, whether they're going to be doing it themselves and we will be assisting them with a review, or whether we're going to do that for them. So I would just want to talk real quick a little bit about some of the resources that have already been put out there and are there for your purview now. We have actually done 5 videos, but I don't know that the 5th video is up on YouTube yet. But those are the videos there that have been in the series since September. And upcoming, we also have the these upcoming training workshops in January, February, and early March. And I think there's 1 or 2 other trainings that'll happen in March, and then the series will be done. The videos that are, or the training sessions that have already been done are on videos on YouTube. If you go to youtube.com and you search Pivotal New Mexico, you can go to their channel and you should be able to find all those videos. And I'm sure that 5th video that's already done but hasn't been put up yet will be put up sometime soon. So let's talk about what are sort of the steps in deciding whether or not you should apply for a grant. I'm going to tell you that there's basically 4 steps, and I'm not going to say they're 4 easy steps. Well, they're not super complex. They do take a little bit of time for you to sort of step back and decide whether or not this is the right approach for your organization, whether it's a nonprofit, whether you're a city-based department, whether you're a nation or a federally recognized tribe, whether you're an educational agency like a post-secondary higher education institution, or maybe a primary or secondary school, any type of entity. I'll probably just refer to you as organization today. Let's talk about what you should think about before you even start putting pen to paper and writing this grant and spending the time to do so. The first is you really need to do an internal assessment of what it is you need funding for. And I want to caution you to not chase money. It's the easiest thing in the world to be sort of intrigued and seduced by the dollars that are hanging over your head. If only you did this program, which is maybe a little outside of what you normally do, but it's sort of close, you end up getting into what we call mission drift. And so I want to highly caution you against doing that. And one of the best ways to prevent yourself from sort of getting into the idea of like, well, maybe we can stretch and do that program because it'll bring in dollars that we need. We're going to advocate that you do the grant priorities identification worksheet. Now, Robert will be sending or has already sent you these 3 worksheets that we'll be talking about today. And we will go over each of the worksheets to sort of go step by step. But we really recommend that even though it may take you 20 minutes, maybe an hour to do these worksheets and sort of take the time to assess different things that you need to think about in considering whether or not you should pursue a grant, it could save you a lot of time wasted if it ends up being not the grant that you can even complete, or maybe not a grant that you're likely to get. It may also, I'm going to argue it will also save you time even if you do pursue the grant, because taking the time to sort of write down and go through these worksheets is going to help you organize your thoughts, which will help you be more efficient when you actually do start writing the grant. So this is our grant priorities identification worksheet, and there are 5-6 columns. Column A is basically you deciding what it is you want to do. Now I'm going to say right here, of course, everybody would love general operating dollars. It'd be great if column A was like general operating, right? But most of the time, not always, but most of the time, that's not what most funders are going to put a call out for. So you need to think about program or service specific activities. There you have an example, which is launch a new after-school program site. Column B is your strategic alignment. That tells you, or you should think about, how well the purpose of the program that you describe in column A aligns with and advances your organization's priorities as well as the community priorities. And sometimes those are 2 different things. And so you'll have to kind of weigh, well, it's really strong priority for us, but it's not that strong in the community, or the community is really pushing for it, but we're not so keen on this. And you'll just sort of have to assess how you would rank it. I would recommend that you use a low, medium, or high scale, or a 1-3-5 scale. Column C is the need for funds. Do not confuse this with the need for the program. Obviously, we would very highly think that every idea we have for our organization is a strong need. It's more so whether or not third-party funding is really necessary in order to undertake the project. You have to think in terms of whether or not the organization resources already support costs, or they could kind of be shifted to support costs, and whether funds could be budgeted to the work and the relative project costs. So for example, can this project happen without external funding? If we truly prioritize this activity, could we shift, or could we fundraise enough money to do this program? The next column is the impact power, and that is the degree to which the grant may result in things being better off, in meaningful ways for those people and for the purposes that your agency or organization serves. It doesn't necessarily have to be high visibility. It just has to be high impact or greatly impacting the demographic you're trying to serve. Then there is the definability power. That is the degree to which you feel it is easy to clearly identify the activities, strategies, goals, and approach for funds. It is easier to get a grant when you can be specific and quantify and be very descriptive than it is for you to sort of be global and long-term. That is not to say you cannot have long-term systemic changes that you're trying to affect, which you can also talk about it, but you're going to at least need to be able to talk about some of the short-term impacts and quantify and qualify those as well. And then finally, column F is, should we even try looking around for funds for this particular activity? So as a quick exercise, I just went through and I created an organization that basically provides trauma care and informed services for parents and children that are escaping domestic violence. So 3 of the activities that I put on there were improve trauma-informed curriculum for clients, hire additional counselors for wraparound services, and purchase supplies for workshops and trainings. And then I sort of imagined in this scenario, if I were looking for funding, the strategic alignment was going to be very high on all of these, and they seem to be pretty high in terms of the community priorities as well. In terms of need, while there is certainly a strong need to have very good trauma-informed curriculum for clients, the funding need was not actually that high, because if we really kind of pressed ourselves internally, we could probably make this more of an effort. But if we could also get some extra resources so that we wouldn't feel quite so pressed for time, that would be great too. And then in terms of definability, it's very difficult to talk about how improved a curriculum is or what that impact is. So it's a little difficult and a little more nebulous than maybe some other programs. So I rated that as the definability power is low. Then for hiring additional counselors, it's high strategic alignment. There's a high need. We have a significant number of people that just aren't getting the actual time with their counselor, with their social worker or their counselor to really help them through every single step. And we would love to be able to afford each of our clients more time. So it's a high need, and it's high in terms of we just don't have additional resources to do it. Under impact power, we felt that, in this scenario, this would be a very high impacting program or addition to our current programs. And in terms of definability, it's pretty easy to talk about the number of extra hours, the number of extra people served, the number of extra referrals, the number of extra therapy groups that were handled by these counselors. So it's really easy to define the impact of having 2 additional counselors. Then purchasing supplies for workshops and trainings. Again, it meets our strategic alignment. It meets our community priorities as well. The need is medium. Well, we could probably work around and push around some funds and maybe do a little bit of a fundraiser for some additional supplies for, say, a workshop training series. That's an ongoing need. And so if we really wanted to make this a priority in terms of pursuing grant funds, maybe we'd put that at a medium need. In terms of impact power, these workshops and trainings we feel are absolutely crucial to the long-term healing and advancement of people that are coming out of these traumatic situations. But again, when we're just not talking about the workshops, but when we're just talking about the supplies, it's kind of hard to sort of define what the impact of the supplies are, having access to those supplies. So I put that at a low. Now, if we use the 1-3-5 sort of system that I recommend, you would put low at a 1, medium at a 3, and high at a 5. And then you're going to add up your 4 columns that have scores. And then your total column, if it is a 16 or a higher, then I would recommend that should be one of the stronger priorities for you in terms of seeking grants or things that you consider writing a grant for if it's sort of open. If you go to somebody and you could actually apply for all 3 of these things, but you have a limited amount that you could apply for, then in this instance, I would say you should go towards hiring additional counselors for wraparound services if the funds themselves are amenable to actually doing that, if they're going to be large enough to be able to do so. Now, if you're at a 14, for example, the purchasing supplies for workshops and trainings is at a 14, that might be something else. Perhaps when you look at the request for application or for proposals, you might think, well, that's maybe a little bit better aligned. And so I'm going to apply for that. Now let's talk about profiling the funding opportunity, which is kind of what I just was talking about. Well, I looked at the request for proposal and they're kind of angling towards wanting to do more education and training. So while we do know that we need additional counselors to help with our wraparound services, if we could more specifically talk about the education and training that we'll do with our clients to help them through their situations and help empower them, that's going to be better aligned with them. And the way we find out sort of what is going to be better aligned is by doing a funding opportunity profile. So, excuse me, it may be a little difficult to see this. I'm going to blow it up for you a little bit, zoom in a little bit here. And so what we're going to do again, we're just sort of taking this, this profile of this imaginary organization that I've been talking about. And then we're going to go to an imaginary funding opportunity. Do not get excited if you think this might apply to you, because this doesn't exist. I just made it up for the purposes of this training. So this grant is a federal grant. It's a trauma care wraparound services grant. Again, note, doesn't exist. Don't go searching for it. Here are the deadlines. There is an application workshop or an applicant workshop on January 7th. There's a letter of intent that is due. It's pretty simple. We just got to say we're intending on applying. That's due January 17th. Excuse me. The application itself is due February 11th. And all letters of recommendation must be in by February 15th. Important to note, again, when I'm assessing, do I have the capacity to write this grant in this time frame? In terms of the purpose of this fake grant, it is to increase or improve services in the field of trauma care for mothers and children in low-income areas. So we think about what our organization does, and we provide services to parents and their children escaping domestic violence, which we would qualify as a trauma. And we want to hire additional counselors for wraparound services. So we would be increasing and improving our services in the field of trauma care. So I would say, yep, there's an alignment there. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is an eligible entity to apply for this federal grant. So great, we are confirmed as eligible. And in the grant itself, it tells us that we could ask for either 100,000 or up to 1 million for up to 5 years. So that would be $1 million spread over 5 years, or $200,000 a year. Our ask, based on what we calculated, is going to be 800,000 or 160,000 for 5 years, which is 2 counselors plus a little bit of fringe benefits, and then maybe some stuff towards some group therapy programming that we really want to implement. At the bottom half, this is where it gets a little tougher. This is where, as you're filling this out, you're going to start thinking, okay, yep, this really is something we can work with, or this is something we can do, or, ooh, these might be a little tougher for us to get. For example, when we look at the application process, we see that there's a letter of intent that is due. It's pretty simple. Great, we can do that. It's a federal application. It has standard forms, something called the SF, or Standard Form 424, which is basically like the cover sheet. There's the SF 424A, which is the budget. And then there's the SF LLL, which is the lobbying form. If you don't know these things, that's okay. But that might also be something to you that you're like, I don't know what these forms are. It's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for me to figure out what those forms are. So you need to assess that as you're figuring out whether or not this is something you want to spend time on. We know that we need 3 letters of support with this grant application. We also need to be able to provide proof or evidence of our last 2 audits, as well as biographies and accreditations and professional development of the key personnel that will be administering the program. Plus, we need a copy of our conflict of interest policy. Pretty easy, but I might have to chase down someone in HR to get it, and I don't even know where that is. So again, as you're thinking about what is involved in the application process, you may look at this and go, yep, this is all pretty doable. I'll have to make sure to manage my time. Or you may say, this is overwhelming to me. This is not something I'm prepared to invest time in. And then right there, you can already stop. In terms of requirements of the projects, based on this imaginary RFP, the services must be provided either in a service area that qualifies as low income, and we know that there are databases that will show where in the US different census tracts, zip codes, etc., qualify as low income, or you have to do individual client eligibility verified either with a W-2, previous tax returns, or proof of benefits. Now, you may say in your organization, oh man, we really we don't ask any of our clients for any eligibility information. They've just gone through a traumatic situation. The last thing we're worried about doing is asking them for a bunch of data. Okay, well then, does your organization exist or serve in a service area that qualifies as low income? Because these are sort of deal breakers. You have to be able to meet the requirements, all of them, or if there's an if or, then you have to meet one of them. You have to make sure that that is something that you can do with your organization. If you can't, again, stop. This is where it's sort of like, if this does not apply to you, stop, the survey is ended, right? Then we have red flags, or things we call out ahead, like we have to get out ahead of these things. The first is, in this imaginary proposal, it requires that we have to have a $50,000 cash match per year. So $250,000 over 5 years. I'm going to assume, as I'm reading this RFP, we don't just have $50,000 out there floating around. So now I have to go talk to my executive director or to the head of my department and say, hey, do we have somebody or some stream of revenue from which we can pull this money to get a $50,000 cash match? Excuse me. It also requires us to provide a resume and a list of all the professional development for the past 3 years. Excuse me.
While Tanya is hopefully feeling a little bit, we hope that Tanya feels better here in just a second, but just also wanted to interject really quick. And if anyone has any questions so far that are bubbling up, you're welcome to drop them here in the chat. Or even you're free to unmute yourselves, and perhaps I could answer any questions that are bubbling up for folks.
Yeah, hey, greetings. This is Anna. This is fantastic. I can't wait to get the templates.
Cool. It's good to hear from you, Anna.
Thank you. This is so great. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Good to hear from you. I do see some familiar faces in the audience today, so it's good to see. Thank you so much for returning to the series, and for anyone that's been coming for the whole series, actually, or just popping in and out. To answer, I think Tanya had we haven't actually put up the 5th video from last week yet. That's just due to my own capacity issues. So we'll have that posted up here, hopefully by the end of this week. So if you have any questions about that one was about program design specifically, and getting ready for a program, like kind of like an introduction to even just a logic model specifically. So this in the chat is from Tabitha. I'm interested to hear which stakeholders are usually included in this review process. There's sometimes a struggle of inclusion versus moving quickly. Tabitha, that's a great question. So, I think when it comes to engaging stakeholders, it's always a matter of like, well, when you're engaging with stakeholders, who are most impacted by the process, by the service, or by the issue that's happening in community, rather than just like inviting stakeholders who may be like really, really, really not present in the issues of community. So yeah, and so and that's always more challenging for a lot of organizations to kind of wrap their mind around. But at the same time, like there are emerging practices now that help people start to engage community in a much more ethical fashion too. I hope that answers your question. And Tanya, welcome back. Are you feeling better?
I am very sorry about that. That was just one of those things caught me wrong, and I had to catch my breath there for a second. So I may be talking a little more softly and not projecting as much. And I apologize. I'm sucking on a cough drop too, so hopefully it won't be too much of an issue. I apologize about that, guys.
Oh my. Well, I'm glad you're feeling better. And yes, take your time if you need it.
Okay. So let me share screen again. All right. So we're talking about $50,000 cash match. We are also talking about needing the professional development list of training for the past 3 years for the staff, and we may have a hard time getting the staff to give us those details in a timely manner, if we're being realistic. Then under priority messages, we know the things that we should prioritize telling the funder is that our community was particularly hard hit by COVID, which exacerbates domestic violence, and we have studies to prove that. So the need is greater than ever. We want to launch an evidence-based group therapy program, which has enjoyed tremendous results in its pilot programs, and we can even cite that study in the narrative. But we also need additional counselors to actually make that possible. We will also be offering services in 3 languages to meet the needs of clients in our community to ensure that the most underrepresented people have places to go. And that is a particularly unique facet of our organization. And so we're going to want to make sure to highlight that. Then in terms of knowledge gap, as you're getting ready to apply for this and you're thinking, what do I know? What do I not know? What do I need to learn? Some things that I would be asking internally is, have we ever applied for a federal grant before? Do we have the internal controls and the accounting to be able to handle federal grants management? Where are we going to get the $50,000 match from? Do we have people lined up for those 2 additional counseling positions so that they can start immediately if we get the grant? How will we evaluate our success, and what benchmarks do we actually want to hit? And finally, how will we sustain these 2 additional positions? If we hire 2 people on and they're with us for 5 years, what happens when the money is gone? Even if we don't address that in the narrative, we need to think about that in terms of applying for it, because you don't want to start a program and have it going and then just have the money gone and then suddenly have to take away all these great services from the community if you can prevent that. So we're not going to do this activity today as a group, but I am going to recommend that when you get these 3 handouts from Robert, take the funding opportunity profiling and go to the W.K. Kellogg Foundation's website as a prospective funder. Even if you're already getting funding or have already pursued them, use this as an activity to sort of profile the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and try to find out what types of programs and services that the W.K. Kellogg Foundation is looking for and how much they tend to give and whether or not you would be eligible, and just sort of use that as an exercise to go through. I am going to show you a pretty neat, I don't want to say trick, maybe a trick or tip if you don't already know it at the end of this. Remind me to show you guys where to look at Foundation's 990s. So the 3rd step is confirming your fit and eligibility. Now that you've seen the funding profile and you have a sense of what the funder is looking to fund, are you really in a position to apply? Should you apply? So first is, can they fund you? Should they fund you? And would they fund you? This is the sort of 3 little mini steps within step 3 of confirming fit and eligibility. So the first step is, are you even eligible? Is your organization, entity, institution eligible per the funder's guidelines? This is usually set up by organization's tax classification. For example, it'll say 501c3s, local and regional governments, but not state governments, or it may say state governments. It may say federally recognized tribes or indigenous nations. It may say yes, institutions of higher education, or no institutions of higher education, etc. So look at the organization tax classification and whether or not you're eligible to apply. Sometimes the funding opportunity will be very specific to geography or service area. So make sure, again, that you are within those, guidelines. Additionally, sometimes there will be guidance on the age of your organization. Most of the time, if there is, it is that you are either 2 or 3 years old, you've been around for 2 or 3 years and older, or sometimes it's the opposite. You're no more than 2 or 3 years old. We know that you're a starting or a nascent nonprofit and we want to help you out. But usually when an organization or a funder will say you have to be like 2 or 3 years old to be able to apply to us, it's because they want to be able to see that you have turned in all your taxes, that you've gone through your audits, that you've done the things year after year to ensure that you are stewarding and doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. And that's just their way of just not giving it to a brand new organization that may flounder if they're not properly set up to be able to handle and implement the grant. And then sometimes there's like organization type requirements. Yes, you can be a 501c3, but you can't be a faith-based organization, for example, or you must be a faith-based organization. Then there's the should they question, right? Should they be interested in funding you? You need to look at their priorities. Usually, whether it's a private funder, a community funder, corporate funder, or even a federal funder, they're going to tell you right out the gate what their priorities are and what it is they're looking to fund. Additionally, they will talk sometimes about their grant strategies, what it is they're hoping their dollars will do, what kind of change they're hoping it'll affect. Sometimes, but not always, they will tell you what the award range is. This is almost always true in the case of federal grants. It is often true in the case of community grants, community foundation grants, or United Way grants. But sometimes, and oftentimes I'll say with like family foundations or private foundations, they will often not give a range because they want to have the discretion to say, yeah, most of the time we give 25 to 50,000, but if we're really into something, we'll give 100,000, and that's our discretion to do so. Those are some generalities. There's obvious exceptions, but that's just to give you an idea. And like I said, at the end of this, I will give you a way to figure out what the average award range for a foundation or organization that gives out funds that's not the federal government. I'll show you how to do that at the end. They may also talk about whether or not they want direct services or indirect services, and they may have certain fund use restrictions. Number 3, affinity. Would they be likely to fund you? If you have received grants from them in the past and you've done well and you turn in your reports, that's a likelihood that they would be willing to consider you again. You want to look at their scoring or review criteria and see if you meet a lot of that, just sort of off the cuff without even writing the narrative. Do you feel like, oh yeah, we were very strong in this? Again, they're more likely to fund you. If you have similarity to past grantees, and oftentimes they will be listed on the funder's website or in the federal portal's website. But again, the little trick I'll show you at the end of this, there's a way to look at least at foundations to see who they've granted in the past, given grants to in the past, if they don't have it publicly listed. Sometimes they'll say we like large organizations that are over $1 million, that are over $10 million. Sometimes they'll say you need a budget of under $200,000. So sometimes they'll talk about the size or the type of agencies or organizations that they like to give to. Additionally, do you have a relationship with this foundation, funder, or even the program officer if it's a federal grant? And by relationship, obviously, I don't mean like, oh yeah, I know him, they're going to give me the money. I certainly hope that's not the situation. But have you begun cultivating with that program officer or with that foundation, giving them information about your organization, letting them know the work that you're doing in the community, kind of turning them on to what you're already doing so that you already sort of have it top of mind when they see your application come across their desk. Okay, yeah, we're going to pay a little extra attention to this one. And then additionally, is your application going to be very competitive? Remember when we talked about the priority points that I would want to talk about with the funder, I talked about the fact that we are one of the few organizations that provide services in 3 different languages. And we can also demonstrate that we were harder hit by COVID, which has more of an impact. And we're seeing, unfortunately, a higher spike of domestic violence in our area. So that would show some competitiveness because A, the need is greater, and B, you're doing something really unique. So we have this third worksheet, and I haven't filled anything out with this per se because it's pretty much more of a conversation, even if you do want to write it out, but it's pretty good for a conversation with others. So can they fund you, right? This imaginary federal grant, they can fund me. I am a 501c3. I am eligible. I exist in a service area that is considered low income, and I'm doing things to increase or improve trauma care services. So I am eligible, and what my project is eligible. Should they fund me? Well, again, when I look at their priorities and their purpose of their grants, yes, they want increased and improved trauma care services, and that's what we're doing. We're hiring 2 additional counselors, and we're going to implement this group therapy program. Would they fund you? This is sort of always the magic question, right? We all wish we knew this answer, but you've got to do your best. So you need to look at whether or not you've made a strong competitive proposal. When you've looked through this, and if you're answering yes, yes, probably, yes, yes, maybe, then it's probably worth it for you to apply. There are a few other things, though, that you should consider in terms of whether or not, even if the answers are yes, 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 right? And so that's step number 4. Before we get to step number 4, we're going to talk about the key takeaways of step number 3, which is really one of the most important steps, in my opinion. You want to watch out for mission drift. Don't just go for a proposal or a funding opportunity because the money's there. You want to look for ways in which you don't fit, as well as how you do. Remember, we had that sort of internal conversation of, we don't ask our clients for their income eligibility, but we do exist in a service area that's considered low income. So we're good there. Look for deal breakers. Consider the size of the award and what's involved. So in this imaginary scenario, I'm applying for an $800,000 grant over 5 years. I'm going to say in most instances, for most organizations, that's worth it. If this is an $80,000 grant over 5 years and they still want all this work, I may say that's like 40 hours worth of work. That's not enough of a return for me to invest my time in it. That's a really sort of a decision that you need to make based on your own budgets and what your internal resources are. And then finally, you really want to make sure that you can execute and manage the grant. And that's step 4. So let's talk about flagging potential issues and hurdles that could come up either during the grant application process or during the grant management process. First of all, you want to make sure that your mission is aligned with the funding priorities and the program purpose that you are applying for. Kind of like in our scenario, you want to make sure that if there is a cost match, there's 2 types of cost match. There's in-kind and there's cash. Either one. You want to be able that you can actually come up with the cost match. You want to make sure that you will be able to provide the required letters of support, that you will have proper governance of your organization. So if you are applying for a federal grant, there are certain things that you have to do internally to make sure that the dollars are, for example, separated from other dollars in your bank account and that they're accounted for in a different way. If you don't have the governance or the structure and infrastructure within your organization, it may not be the right grant for you to apply to. You also want to consider what the reporting requirements are. If they're going to require you to report once a month and you are a staff of 3, you may not want to apply. But if it's a biannual or an annual and it's not terribly cumbersome reporting, then again, okay, that's what we expect with grants. No problem, we've got this. Additionally, be careful and watch for required activities that are in a funder's proposal or funder's request for proposals, because the activities sometimes will be a surprise. For example, I just wrote a grant where it wasn't a surprise, but we had to be mindful of this while we wrote it, that there was a required annual meeting that the grantee, our client, would have to go to if they were awarded this. And we had to make sure to include that in the budget so that it didn't suddenly become this huge cost burden to us to be able to meet required activities that we didn't think about when we were budgeting for. Other potential hurdles, things like some pre-submission requirements. If a letter of intent is absolutely required and the letter of intent deadline is gone, don't waste your time. You will not get in. MOUs or memorandums of understanding and other letters of agreement or partnership or collaboration, you want to make sure that you have readily available. Sometimes you have the match. We got the $50,000. We have a foundation that's going to give us $50,000 over the next 5 years. So that's our $250,000. So we've got the match. We've got the commitment to it, but you don't have the letter. And a letter is actually required, as opposed to us just stating from the executive director, for example, we have a commitment from such and such foundation that they'll do it. Maybe the foundation can't get you a letter because they won't be able to do it until they have their next board meeting, and the next board meeting is after the deadline. So again, these are issues or things that you want to make sure you're out ahead of before you decide to invest any kind of time and unfortunately waste your time in that instance. Sometimes you need to get information about your performance site or partner agreements. Sometimes you need to get really complex financial documents and information. Sometimes funders will ask you for very strange things or things that are very unusual. I'm sure there's a good reason, but you don't normally have this type of document on hand. So you're like, oh, it might take me 2 to 3 weeks to find this document, create this document, get a hold of our contractor who we only really deal with twice a year, who could give us this document. So again, make sure you're looking at what all the requirements are and what the application process includes so that you know what you're up against. And then finally, sometimes you are required to have a registration, particularly in the instance of federal grants, to even be able to apply. And that was actually our, I think, video number 2. Robert, you can correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. I think video number 2 was our acronym alphabet soup. It was all the acronyms and the federal registries that you needed to be able to register and apply for most federal grants. So that's another thing. If you don't have a SAM.gov account, or if you don't have a DUNS number or a UEI, and if you don't even know what those things are, and you're looking to apply for a federal grant, you may need to look at the time frame and say, okay, it's going to take us 6 to 8 weeks to get registered. Is that even within the time frame? So our 4 steps. First, self-assessment of your grant needs. You really should be doing this before you're even looking at grants, but sometimes it's done concurrently because you see a grant opportunity available and you go, okay, let's stop, let's assess. What do we need? What do we really want to prioritize getting? And where do we go from here? Step number 2 is then looking at the actual opportunity and profiling it and seeing what all is involved and how you may or may not align with it. Number 3 is confirming your fit and eligibility. So yes, we could apply, but are we the best and strongest contender to apply? And then finally, 4th is really sort of trying to talk yourself out of it, right? Flag potential issues. If there are so many issues and hurdles that you feel like this is insurmountable, you may decide this is not worth your time. You might also take the chance. You may take the risk. You may bust your butt to try to get this out and think, you know what? It's time. We're never going to have time to write a federal grant. It's now or never. Let's do this. We're all committed as a team. Let's get this together. And yes, we know what the hurdles are, but we've already identified those and we're starting early in the process. And so because we've filled out these worksheets and we know what we're up against, we can start working and being as efficient as possible. So now questions. Should you apply? What are your thoughts on these steps? Do you have screening tips or other techniques and methods that you go through in order to share? So go ahead and either type your response in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. And in the meantime, I will look at the past questions. Unless, Robert, do you have a list of questions you want to go through?
No, but I did notice that there was a question in the chat. So this is from Artrageous. We're new to applying for grants as of 2021. We have secured 1 medium grant and expect to secure sponsorship and hopefully more small grants next year for our larger program we're launching in 2022. What is the point most organizations become competitive to receive larger or multi-year grants? That is a great question.
That is a great question. So there's a lot in there. So let me kind of unpackage that a little bit. So you've secured 1 medium grant. I don't know what do you define as a medium grant? And you expect to secure a sponsorship, which is different than grants. That's like usually a corporate sponsorship, and then hopefully some more small grants. When I talk medium and small, are you there? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, medium is 10,000, and
Okay.
then we've secured through our other organizations sponsorship in the past and have good connections. So we're hoping to leverage those and continue growing our sponsorship.
Okay. How long has your organization been around? You're new to applying for grants, but how long have you been around?
Since 2015.
Okay, so you're established.
Incorporated in 2018.
Okay, great. So here's the thing. There is not a point or it's not like, say a job, right? When you're applying for a job, you need certain little jobs that you need to build up your skills so you can get a bigger job. You can get what you would consider a large grant right out of the gate, right? That is possible. What's more likely, though, is they're going to look at the size of your overall program budget or maybe organizational budget if you're looking for operational funding. And they're going to say, we will fund either a portion of that. You know, if it's a big project, if it's a big program, it's your $500,000 program. They're probably not going to give you $500,000 and fund the entire program. But what they might do is go, okay, we'll give you 50,000. That's a tenth of what you're doing. And that's sort of just a random number. Don't expect that they necessarily sort of have these formulas. But what a funder is going to do is they're going to look at your total program budget or services budget. And most of the time, they're not going to be the one that's funding it exclusively. Unless it's a brand new program and you're looking sort of for some pilot or startup funds. And that could be small or that could be very large, depends on how ambitious you are. It depends on whether or not you're able to demonstrate your capacity to do that. Yep, we know we're asking you for $200,000 and that's a lot because you normally only give out 50 to 100,000. But let me give you 7 reasons why you should consider our organization and why we are prepared to do this and why it's so important to do this in our community. At that point, it becomes more about your compelling narrative and your argument to them. And then, they decide whether or not that's something they want to do. So there isn't like a point at which you're like, okay, well, you've gotten $5,000, $10,000 grants. Now you can start asking for $50,000 grants, right? But I will tell you, sometimes funders will ask for your list of previous grant history, right? Because they're going to want to see, okay, what are other foundations doing? What level of investment are these other foundations willing to give? Because we're probably going to mimic that, right? So on the other hand, there is maybe something to that. If you're only getting $5,000 or $10,000 grants and they ask for that list or that history, you may only get a $5,000 or $10,000 grant. But we got a little bit of time. As soon as you feel that I've answered your question, I will take you to the tips and tricks section, the bonus section of this workshop, to show you where you can kind of look for good asks for foundations. So have I answered your question so far?
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. So hang on a second and let me show you something. I'm going to put in the chat the name of this website. If you're not already familiar with guidestar.org, you are going to be. So this is GuideStar right here. You will need to sign in and create an account. You can see I've got my account right here. And then right here, you can search for either a nonprofit organization or a foundation. This does not apply for federal grants, but any other foundation that is registered with the IRS will be in GuideStar for the most part. So if I search, for example, for the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, I will get a list of the ones are possible matches. And sometimes you get funny things because they put, W.K. Kellogg Foundation in their job or in their description. But right away, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation comes up at the top. So I click on it. And then as I scroll through, I get information about the Kellogg Foundation's mission. I get notes that they put in themselves about their nonprofit. Sometimes they'll put in information about their programs. Here they've got their community leadership network. Then they've got information about educated kids. I mean, Kellogg Foundation has done a nice job of really putting in a bunch of information about their organization. But this is the tip and trick that I would use. Not only does that help you get to know your funder better, which can only be helpful to deciding A, is this a good alignment? Is this a good match for us? And B, figuring out the best way to angle your approach in an authentic way to make sure that you are speaking sort of the same language that they are and trying to do the same things that they're doing. On the right-hand side, you will see here what says tax forms, show forms 990, okay? So when you click on this, the last 3 uploaded 990 forms that have been turned into the IRS will be here. When you click this, it will either download a PDF for you or it'll jump up a screen like this. Okay, 990s are the most exciting thing in the world to me. And most people, unless you're an accountant, think 990s are the most boring thing in the world. But here's why 990s are important. If you scroll through, and I happen to know in this instance that it starts at page 11, because I looked it up in advance. Every foundation that has given out money has to publicly declare who and what purpose they gave their funding out to. So in this instance, we can see that the Kellogg Foundation gave this organization 1,000 days. This, for the purposes of improving breastfeeding and child nutrition, et cetera, this amount of money. Now, there's a lot of grants here, but I can go through and I see 143,000, 150,000, 85,000, 72,000, 300,000, right? I'm seeing pretty big ranges. I also see 1,000, 30,000, 23,000. So I'm seeing a pretty broad range, right? And I could go through and I said, wow, there was one up there, it was 500,000. There was another, it was 686,000. So as I'm considering approaching W.K. Kellogg Foundation, I'm seeing that they kind of run the gamut, right? So in that instance, I then can think about what is an appropriate ask to that funder. Now, as I mentioned, some funders will absolutely tell you, here's what our range is. This is what we'll do, period, point blank, that's it. Some of them will intentionally not list it because they want to have that discretion. And sometimes it's like, I don't know what's a good ask. I don't want to ask them for 2,500 if their usual gift is 25,000. And if only I had asked them for more, I could have gotten more. Conversely, I don't want to come in with a $100,000 ask to a small family foundation that only gives out $5,000 awards, right? So looking at a foundation's 990s is an excellent way to A, gauge the range of awards, B, look at the organizations and programs and services that they have previously funded, because that is, as I mentioned earlier in the training, a great way to say, wow, they funded a ton of other domestic violence prevention organizations. They're totally going to love us. Like, this is a great match, right? So looking at the 990s, particularly looking for that, and you will find that in any foundation, it has to be one line or more. They have to put how much they gave, what the organization was, where they were, and what was the purpose of the funding. So that's my bonus tip for today. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
This is Dexter. The 50,000 matching, is that related to the amount of grant you're seeking?
It usually is. In my example, it was just a sort of a random, again, remember that was a fake grant, but oftentimes it'll be like 10%, 15%, 25%, 50%, or even dollar for dollar. I'm working on a grant right now where the client has to match dollar for dollar, 100%. But that's a great way to double your money, right? Still worth it to the client themselves. But yes, it's usually a percentage and not just like a flat rate.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Where do you find these foundations that give match or challenge grants? Are they listed somewhere?
So that's a little bit different of a question. I get your question. So to know which foundations do challenge grants, right? You want to know, we want to do fundraising and we want to, I'm sorry, let me rewind. There's two different things we're talking about here. There are challenge grants, which is where a foundation says, we'll give you 25,000 if you can raise 25,000, or we'll give you up to 25,000 for as many dollars as you raise, up to 25,000. That's a challenge grant. Getting matching funds is different. Sometimes you go to a foundation and you say, hey, if we're able to leverage these funds for this program, are you willing to match and provide the match? Sometimes a foundation has already given you $50,000 and it was unrestricted, and you say to them, we would like to apply this 50,000 towards this. Are you okay with that? I mean, it's unrestricted, so they're probably not going to have a problem with it. Can we do so? Sometimes if it's, for example, remember how I talked about there's two different types of matching. There's cash and there's in kind. Sometimes we're using $50,000 of the executive director's salary because the executive director is going to have to spend more than half their time on the project, and we can demonstrate more than half their salary is at least $50,000. Then we've demonstrated in-kind matching. So there's two different things. There are challenge grants where I don't know that there's a directory off the top of my head other than to go to the Foundation Center. Oh, it's now Candid, which is also what GuideStar is part of. If you go to candid.org, I believe, you can look up, but oftentimes you need to have a subscription to that service. However, you can also go to a lot of libraries that have that subscription to be able to search for specifically for challenge grants, if that's in fact what your question is.
Thank you.
I'm going to search the chat to make sure that I didn't miss any questions. And I want to thank Robert for filibustering while I was off screen trying to catch my breath. Thank you very much for that. Good job, Robert. I could hear you. Hoping to learn how to maximize our time in searching for grants that are a good match for our organization. That was from Sharon Amaste. Excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your last name. Sharon, as I just mentioned, you might want to look under what used to be called the Foundation Center and now is called Candid. Let me double check that I've got the right website and I'll put it in the chat for you guys. I think it's candid.org. It is. Okay. So it used to be called the Foundation Center, and they have an excellent database where you can search for grants. But the purpose of this workshop is not where to find the money. It's once you've found the money opportunity available, should you apply for it? There was a video, it was video number 1 in the series. It's how to navigate grants.gov, and that's an excellent way to search for federal grants. That was taught by Wendy McCoy, also from the Grant Plant, so I would recommend you watch that one. And then I believe, Robert, do we have another prospecting? I think we have a prospecting workshop coming up, but I could be wrong on that. I feel like that one's in March, maybe?
I think that one's actually in January.
Oh, January, there you go.
Second week of January or the fourth week of January. So second Wednesday or fourth Wednesday. I can't remember. Let me pull it up.
All right. And then Tabitha, I know that Robert tried to answer this question, which was, I'm interested to hear which stakeholders are usually included in the review process. There's sometimes a struggle of inclusion versus moving quickly. And we actually talked a little bit about this. I think it's video number 4. I'm reviewing. You got to watch the whole series. If you missed any of these, you got to watch them all. But I think it's video number 4, which is what funders really want. And it was me talking about my perspective as being a grant reviewer, what we're hearing behind the scenes. So in terms of the review process, they're usually reviewed by staff and or volunteers that come on to be specific grant reviewers, and or paid grant reviewers. That's usually in the case of federal grants, and or sometimes like the board of directors will do it. So it just depends. If you have a community foundation, it's usually an advisory council of community members who do that with oversight from a board, as an example. If it's a federal grant, it's usually a paid or volunteer federal grant reviewer who has been vetted through the process and has had to submit like an application and a resume about why they're qualified to even review these things. And so it really just kind of varies in terms of the stakeholders and those that are involved in the review process. But I recommend you go back and watch that video because I give you some more insight in terms of what you should be thinking about regarding the review. There we go. He put it in there, grants prospecting on January 19th. So, and yes, Lena, all the videos are available, except we have not yet uploaded a video number 5, but I'm sure that's coming soon. And this is video number 6, which will also go up soon. Tabitha, my question was more on the front end. Who should be included in the 4-step process? Oh, I'm sorry. Both of us missed that. So I'm going to assume nonprofit organization for the bulk of this answer. Usually there is a grant manager. Sometimes the grant writer is the grant manager. Sometimes the grant writer has to work underneath a development director. So if you don't have any of those things and you're just somebody who's a program coordinator who happens to be writing a grant and there isn't a development department, then it should be you and your executive director. Essentially, it is whoever's writing the grant and or sometimes you include the next step up supervisor. Those are the people that should at least be in the process of the first one, which is what do we need funding for, right? Your executive director can probably have the vision and guide you in that direction, or maybe the executive director has already given it to your development director. That's the person you're talking to. Then the next step, your funding profiling, you could just do by yourself as the person who's possibly writing the grant. And then the third worksheet, the can they, would they, should they, I think at that point will probably work through on your own and then probably discuss with, again, your supervisor, is this one you want to pursue? It really depends on your level of autonomy. When I was the regional grant manager for the American Red Cross, I had all the decision-making power. I could decide everything, right? Which was great. Aside from the fact that I knew I had my guidance on what was our funding priorities, what were the things that we wanted to get funding from. So that's the best that I can do without knowing more about your organization in terms of who should be at those tables. Sometimes you may also decide to include the program coordinator for the program that you are in fact deciding to apply to or apply on behalf of, because they can give you more information about how easily accessible maybe some statistics would be, or give you some insight in terms of how much they could help you in providing information that you would need in writing the program narrative. VJ says, should you attempt to meet with the foundation grant managers in person, especially if you do not have a personal link? Well, if they will meet with you, yes, absolutely. A better thing is just to give them a call or shoot them an email first to say, hey, We're looking at some of your funding opportunities. We feel like there's a really good match. We have a couple of ideas. Do you have some time for me to shoot those past you? That's their job. Most of the time, they would much rather have that conversation and help you sort of weed out the ones that are not going to be as strong of a match and say, oh, yeah, like actually, we're really interested in that other one. If you could build that one up, that'd be fantastic because we'd love to see that come across our desk to really be able to review it. So I would absolutely recommend, if their contact information is listed, that you contact them. Sometimes there are foundations that kind of don't want to be contacted. That's usually has to do with some of those smaller like family foundations that tend to know who they're already going to be funding year after year after year. And they don't really take a lot of solicitations, although they don't necessarily say we don't take solicitations. So like, I wouldn't necessarily go to their 990, find their information, and then send them a letter, which is usually their home address. But if it's on their website and it's listed, then yes, contact them. Claire says, do you have advice for identifying sources of unrestricted dollars? I'm not laughing. I'm laughing because I have been in your shoes and I wish I knew that answer. Claire, there are not a lot of organizations or foundations that are just looking to give unrestricted dollars. That does not mean they don't exist. I know that there are several, but it is harder to find. And I would recommend, again, going to that candid.org and looking through their Foundation Center database. I want to emphasize that most libraries or many libraries have a subscription to that Foundation Center database. So you don't have to pay for a subscription, which is quite costly. You can go to your nearest library, spend half a day there, search in, I want unrestricted operating dollars for those that are interested in serving parents and children that are escaping domestic violence in Santa Fe, New Mexico, right? Like, you can be very specific about your searches, and then it'll yield a bunch of results, and you can either print it out or make mad notes and then start following up on those things. That's the best way to look for unrestricted general operating dollars from private or family foundations or community foundations. You will not get unrestricted general operating dollars from federal grants. That I have been doing this for 20 years. I'm not going to say never. I'm going to say I've never seen unrestricted general operating through a federal grant. Art Rageous says, can you give more examples of how to meet an in-kind match requirement? Staff time, volunteer time, materials and equipment that you are going to be providing. And equipment is appropriate if the equipment has a, what do they call that? Not deterioration. I'm drawing a blank. Depreciation. Depreciation is the word I'm looking for. If you can say, we'll be using this and it depreciates in value year after year, and we're using it for 3 years, so there's a depreciated value match. Sometimes you get matched from private donors or a funding you already have. Sometimes you can reroute if you have earned revenue that you have for your organization. You have an art show, and we're gonna get, we'll take all of the proceeds from all of the shows that we have over the year, and that will be our match towards it. So any kind of revenue, cash or in kind, can be applied if it's an in-kind match. They're never going to say no to cash. On the opposite hand, though, if they say cash match, no matter how much you offer them of your in-kind value, they're not going to be interested. And Lena says, a general operating fund through federal grants can be called a capacity building grant. No. Because usually with a capacity building grant, you still have to be doing some kind of program or activity to improve the capacity of your organization to provide services. That's not the same as here's money to keep your lights on, here's money to pay your people. Excuse me. It is after 3. I am happy to stay on and keep answering questions, but if anybody wants to bounce, you're not going to offend me or hurt my feelings. Dexter, you said, what is your contact information? I'm going to put it right here in the chat. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you look for me under LinkedIn, you can find that. Tabitha says, thanks for the info and your time today. Thank you, guys. Again, sorry about the crazy interruption in the middle. That was crazy. I've never had that ever happen in many years of trading. So I was dying. So, all right. With that, I'm not seeing any other questions or comments or suggestions. As I mentioned, Anna, you are fantastic. You're really motivational. Thank you, Anna. I appreciate it. Do not be afraid to contact me. If you need advice, if you want suggestions, if you're feeling uncertain, I love to help. I love training. I love teaching, and I love my job. I love grant writing and doing resource development. I'm really friendly. So go ahead and contact me. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Bye, guys.